At 10:42 local time, a Chinese radar operator on the Shandong coast picked up 10 F-16s crossing the Korean coastline westbound. 3 altitude blocks, single heading, American jets out of Osan, doing what American jets have done in this part of the world for 70 years. The duty officer hit the scramble order and rolled 6 J-16s off the flight line to handle it. Unknown to those J-16 pilots climbing out of Shandong with PL-15s on the rails, they weren't about to intercept a strike package. They were about to fly into a geometry problem that no amount of missile range could solve. 12 minutes later, the Chinese 6-ship formation was through 20,000 feet in a tight wedge and climbing hard toward the F-16 formation, pushing west across international waters. 18 minutes after the scramble, the lead Chinese pilot had a missile-quality lock on Viper 1 at 140 kilometers. The J-16's AESA, a radar that aims electronically instead of mechanically, jumping between targets faster than a human can blink, held the track solid. Closure rate 900 knots, 1,000 miles an hour of airspace eaten between them, fire control solution lit. He's got Viper 1 cold. The F-16 formation didn't react as the lock held for 10 seconds, then 20, then 30. 10 seconds is when most pilots break. 20 is when even disciplined pilots start asking questions over the formation freak. 30 is when the brigade calls the wing commander and the wing commander calls a senator. Viper 1 didn't break, didn't transmit, didn't twitch. He just kept flying west, like the J-16 lead's missile quality lock was a weather report. Viper 1's radar warning receiver was screaming inside the cockpit, a high-pitched warble pitch to make a man's hair stand up. And his thumb hovered an inch over the chaff button, the switch that dumps clouds of metallic strips to confuse incoming radar, without committing. His wingmen were holding altitude and heading like they couldn't hear a thing. The J-16 lead can't decide whether the Americans don't see him or just don't care. He has range advantage, missile advantage, and a KJ-500 AEW bird watching the whole picture from inside Chinese airspace and feeding him tracks. The KJ-500 is orbiting 200 kilometers behind the engagement at 30,000 feet. Think of it as a flying security camera mounted above the entire battlefield, watching every blip on a screen the size of a dining room table and feeding that picture to every Chinese fighter in the air. Its surveillance radar is painting a picture nobody on the J-16 side has any reason to doubt. 10 F-16s, 3 altitude blocks, single heading, closure rate 900 knots. The Chinese AEW operator has called this exact picture before in 20 exercises against Chinese aggressor squadrons. He's never called it against the real thing. The J-16 lead tightens the lock, pushes the throttles forward, and closes to 100 kilometers, expecting the Americans to break and run. They don't. The lock holds, and the Americans keep flying west like he isn't even there. What just locked Viper 1? The Shenyang J-16, China's heavyweight strike fighter. A Russian flanker airframe with Chinese AESA bolted to the nose and 12 hard points loaded for bear. PL-15s on the rails, and a brochure that promises 5th-generation performance from what's basically a 1988 Camaro with a Tesla dashboard. The radar in its nose is substantially bigger than the AESA in the F-16's nose. Detection range past 250 kilometers, dozens of targets on the scope at once. What's riding under its wings? The PL-15. China's longest-reaching air-to-air missile, dual-pulse rocket motor that fires once to launch and again to sprint, like a drag racer hitting the nitrous right before the finish line. Burnout speed past Mach 4, range of 200 kilometers. Boston to Baltimore covered in under 3 minutes. The Seeker is its own little AESA radar that goes active inside the last 30 kilometers, meaning the missile stops needing the launch jet once it's close enough to smell the target. 20-kilogram blast fragmentation warhead, and there's nothing on the F-16 that outranges it. On paper, this is the most dangerous beyond visual range package the PLA Air Force has ever fielded. On paper, the math on this engagement is decided before it starts. The J-16 sees first, locks first, and shoots first. The Chinese pilot is flying this engagement on paper. The Americans aren't. Look at the J-16 lead's scope at 90 kilometers. His radar refresh paints something his scope didn't show at 140 a minute earlier. The F-16 formation isn't stacked at one altitude. 4 contacts are at 34,000 feet, 4 contacts at 28,000 feet, and 2 more contacts trail low at 22,000 feet. 12,000 feet of vertical separation across 40 kilometers of lateral spread. 10 contacts arrayed through 3 altitude blocks like a thrown handful of sand. The Chinese pilot has a clean lock on one of those 10 contacts and a search track on 6 of the others. The 2 low ones are barely on his scope at all. The 2 low contacts, Outlaw, were tucked against the Yellow Sea at 22,000 feet, where the J-16's look-down radar had to fight sea clutter to hold them. Sea clutter is what happens when a radar tries to pick a fighter out of the wave reflections coming off the water below, like trying to hear a single conversation in a stadium. The Chinese radar wasn't choosing to ignore Outlaw, it couldn't see them clean. The F-16 formation he thought was a strike package is, in fact, a trap with 3 jaws, and he just walked his nose into the middle one. That spread isn't an accident. The J-16's AESA at this range can't electronically scan vertically through the entire stack at once. The radar has to mechanically tilt the antenna, and at 90 kilometers, the tilt resolution is barely good enough to separate contacts 6,000 feet apart. The Americans just doubled that, and the J-16 lead's radar is going to spend the next 30 seconds trying to decide which altitude block to commit to. The J-16 lead does the only thing he can do. He widens his radar beam to scan the whole stack of altitudes at once, and the lock on Viper 1 craters. The narrow beam track that gave him the missile quality solution 30 seconds ago vaporizes, replaced by volume search across the entire spread. Somewhere in this cockpit, the most expensive radar in the PLA Air Force inventory just got embarrassed by basic geometry. Imagine trying to watch 3 floors of a building through a single window. You can see 1 floor clearly, but the other 2 require you to physically move, and the Americans just put fighters on all 3 floors. The J-16 lead had 2 options: stay narrow on 1 target and miss the rest, or widen out and lose his shot. But he had no choice but to widen. The J-16 lead's fire control radar just lost a fight with high school physics, and he hadn't even fired a missile yet. The Americans noticed the second the lock dropped, and Viper 1 keys the radio once. 9 clicks come back across the formation in 2 seconds, and Viper pushes forward. Shadow banks south. Outlaw holds heading. The geometry just got harder for the Chinese pilots trying to track everyone at once. The J-16 lead's radar can still solve it, and his wingman's radars can hold the picture too. But nobody on the Chinese side fixes that geometry without burning energy doing it. At 70 kilometers, the J-16 lead made his decision. He'd been chasing this American formation for 4 minutes without a clean lock, and his patience was gone. Nose up 20 degrees, afterburners lit across all 6 aircraft in the wedge, climbing hard for 34,000 feet to engage the high-force ship before they could split any further. His wingmen followed in a loose trail, 6 Chinese fighters with throttles forward, climbing fast, burning fuel for altitude. The J-16 lead was doing exactly what his training taught him: engage the closest threat first. Standard intercept doctrine. Run the way Beijing wrote it in the manual. Textbook stuff. He closed to 50 kilometers and started working his radar back into a firing solution on the lead F-16. High element of the F-16 saw the climb start before the J-16's nose came up. The first indication arrived in Viper 1's cockpit a full 20 seconds before any tracking radar return would have shown the climb in progress. Viper 1 banked 60 degrees right, held altitude at 34,000 feet, and pushed his throttle forward to military power without lighting his own afterburner. Viper 1 is flying the F-16C Block 70 you see here, America's last single-engine fighter, Mach 2. Combat radius 550 nautical miles, Seattle to San Francisco. AESA in the nose, helmet-mounted cueing, and an EW suite that listens to every Chinese radar on the same frequency the J-16 transmits on. The jet is built to do exactly what it's told. Viper 2, 3, and 4 followed his lead and matched the maneuver across the foreship. The foreship spread across 2 miles of sky and accelerated to Mach 0.95, a mile of airspace every 5 seconds, just under the speed of sound in level flight. The J-16s, still climbing through 31,000 feet, watched their closure rate stop on the tactical display, then watched it reverse and start running negative. Located here on the F-16's nose is the APG-83 SABR radar, a scaled-down AESA that fits inside the F-16's smaller nose cone. Think of it as a compact sports car versus the J-16's full-size SUV. Smaller dish, shorter detection range, but the same electronic scanning technology that lets it jump between targets without physically moving. But what gave Viper 1 his 20-second head start wasn't his own radar at all. It was the EW suite below his cockpit, essentially a set of ears that listens to every radar signal in the sky the way a police scanner picks up radio chatter. It had been eavesdropping on the J-16 lead's fire control radar since the first lock at 140 meters. When the J-16 pitched his nose up and committed to the chase, his radar's tracking pattern shifted to keep the lock through the climb. That shift hit Viper 1's RWR seconds before any tracking return would have shown the climb in progress. The Chinese radar that was supposed to be hunting Viper 1 spent the climb broadcasting the J-16 lead's every move in real time to the very formation it was hunting. What just happened in those 3 minutes is the oldest math in air combat. Energy is altitude plus airspeed, and you only get it from one place, the engine. Think of it like a bank account. Climbing spends it, diving earns it back. And afterburner? That's a credit card with a 40% interest rate. The J-16s just maxed out the card chasing the target the Americans wouldn't let them reach. The F-16 spent theirs extending level at military power, never lighting the afterburner. The J-16 lead climbed because his training said engage the closest threat first. He just spent his fuel margin on a chase the F-16s never had to match. At 34,000 feet, with the J-16 still climbing toward them and Viper 1 through 4 holding at Mach 0.95 in a 4-ship line abreast, Viper 1 keyed 2 clicks on the formation radio, the bracket. Viper 3 and Viper 4 broke left toward the south. Viper 1 and Viper 2 broke right toward the north. 2 pairs going in opposite directions at 90 degrees of bank, pulling 5 Gs at maximum rate turn, 6 negative degrees of pitch to gain energy through the descent. Inside Viper 1's cockpit, the G-suit clamped down on his legs and his vision tunneled briefly to a gray pinprick. 4 American fighters executing in lockstep across 2 miles of sky. No radio call, no command needed. Every pilot in the formation already knew his job before Viper 1 keyed the click. The bracket forces the question every fighter pilot in the J-16 formation was about to face. Which half do you chase? It's the oldest trick in the book. Like 2 kids running opposite directions from a babysitter. You can only chase one and the other one's raiding the cookie jar. Pick wrong and the other half flanks you. Pick right and you've still given up half the engagement. There's no good answer. The J-16 lead had a quarter of a second to make a decision. The J-16 lead's radar saw 4 targets become 2 pairs in the same refresh cycle. He picked the closer pair, Viper 1's element to the north, because that's what the book said to do when a formation splits in front of you. His wingmen followed him into the right turn, and the left pair went uncontested for the next 2 minutes. The book worked perfectly. The book had also been written by people who never flew against an Air Force that wrote its own books. He didn't see the actual problem yet. The left pair was climbing higher and arcing wider on a long sweeping turn. He couldn't track them through his right turn because they were already outside his radar cone. He focused on Viper 1's pair instead, closer to his nose, lower than his altitude, inside his radar volume. The threat he could see was the bait. The threat he couldn't see was already settling in behind him. 12,000 feet below the engagement, Outlaw had pushed throttles forward and pulled the nose up. 2 F-16s trading airspeed for altitude on a zoom climb out of 22,000. The same trick a roller coaster uses, banking speed at the bottom of the track to spend it on height at the top. They were climbing into a piece of sky no Chinese radar was looking at, the low element popping up behind the fight while the enemy stared at the high group. Every US fighter pilot learns the move in flight school. Nobody on the Chinese side was looking down to catch it. At 11:07 local time, 2 F-16s sit in the J-16 formation's deep 6 o'clock at 36,000 feet, 30 kilometers back and 2,000 feet above. Inside Outlaw 1's cockpit, the only sound is the steady hum of the engine and the soft whisper of his own breath through the oxygen mask. Radar in standby, AMRAAMs in priority firing slot. The controlled stillness of a hunter waiting for the prey to turn its back the rest of the way. The J-16 lead doesn't know they're there, and none of his wingmen do either. 6 Chinese fighters with the most expensive radars in the PLA Air Force inventory, and not one of them is looking the right direction. The trap closed 7 minutes ago, and nobody on the Chinese side has even noticed. What just happened to the Chinese formation has a name in fighter aviation: Check 6 failure. 6 men staring out the same windshield, like a row of cars driving on the same highway with nobody checking the rear view. To check the 6, Somebody has to physically turn his aircraft around or twist his neck behind his shoulder. Nobody did. And that's how a pair of F-16s ends up in the firing position behind J-16s without firing a shot. Viper 1's pair held the bait. They flew nose on to the J-16 formation, refusing to brake, refusing to descend, holding altitude at 34,000 feet with airspeed pegged at Mach 0.95. The J-16 lead pressed in to 60 kilometers, then 50, then 40 across the next 60 seconds of the closure. At 40 kilometers, he had clean fire control geometry on the lead F-16, and his fuel state ticked over into amber on the right gauge. He could shoot if this were combat, but he couldn't sustain another hard maneuver if it wasn't. The Americans flying nose-on into a J-16 with PL-15s on the rails had to know what they were betting, and they were betting on a Chinese pilot blinking first. Spoiler, the Chinese pilot blinked first. His wingmen weren't just trailing the lead. Each of them was holding his own lock on a different F-16 in Shadow's middle force ship at 28,000 feet, doing the same work the lead was doing on Viper. 6 J-16s, 8 nose-on F-16s spread between Viper and Shadow. Every Chinese radar in the formation committed forward. Nobody had bandwidth left for the 2 contacts that had quietly fallen off the bottom of the scope. His wingmen were calling fuel state on the radio every 15 seconds. 2 of them are below combat reserve already and dropping toward bingo. Bingo being fighter pilot lingo for, if I leave right now, I make the runway. 2 of them weren't at bingo. They were past it. The KJ-500 is asking him over the data link what he plans to do next, and he has the lead F-16 in firing position with nothing he can do about it. If he takes the shot in a real engagement, he wins decisively. But he can't take it. This is a peacetime intercept in international airspace, and he has to find a graceful way to disengage before his wingmen flame out trying to follow him through one more hard turn. Beijing wanted a sovereignty demonstration, and Beijing was about to get a fuel emergency. The lead Chinese pilot pushed his nose down 5 degrees and dropped power back to military. He started the energy recovery descent, pushed the nose down, let gravity do the work, get airspeed back without burning the engine. The J-16 needed altitude back, it needed airspeed back, and the descent would buy him both inside 90 seconds. Viper 1's pair caught the throttle pull on their displays and held position at 34,000 feet. They didn't pursue, didn't brake, and didn't let the Chinese formation recover energy and start the turn for home. The Americans had the J-16 lead dead to rights, and they let him have his energy back. Same way you let a guy at a bar finish his drink before you tell him his cab is here. The J-16 lead, recovering energy through the descent, banked slightly left to lead his wingmen back toward the Shandong coast. Outlaw 1 and Outlaw 2, sitting in his deep 6 o'clock at 36,000 feet, slid forward to keep the bearing as the Chinese formation came around. The J-16s, still recovering from the climb, were now flying directly away from a pair of F-16s they didn't know existed. The pair they did know about was still nose-on at 34,000 feet, watching them turn. Whichever way the lead Chinese pilot turned next, an F-16 had him. He hadn't figured that out yet. The J-16 lead banked left toward Shandong and pushed his throttles forward into the cruise back profile. From this seat, the engagement was ending the exact way he wanted it to end. Americans turning east, Chinese turning west, no shots fired. He was already drafting the after-action report in his head. Successful intercept, sovereignty maintained, foreign aircraft pushed back. Standard hero stuff. Then his number 5 called a contact off the radio in clipped Mandarin, bearing 080, range 35 kilometers, above and behind the formation. 2 F-16s at 36,000 feet, holding the same heading the Chinese formation was flying home on, from a position the J-16 radars couldn't see on any scan. Number 5 didn't see the Americans on radar at all. He saw them with his eyes on the canopy turn, when the formation banked west and put them above his right shoulder for a few seconds. 2 gray silhouettes against the yellow sea sky, holding station, watching the Chinese formation turn for home. Number 5 was the only Chinese pilot in the formation who'd been clearing his 6 like he'd been taught at flight school. He probably wouldn't get a medal for it. The lead Chinese pilot's stomach dropped through the floor of the cockpit and into the C-pan. He ran the engagement back in his head and realized it in pieces over the next 90 seconds. 6 J-16s plus a KJ-500 watching from behind, Billions of yuan of Chinese air superiority hardware tactically dismantled by 10 F-16 Block 70s the US Air Force buys for a price of a downtown Seattle condo. The Americans brought a cheaper jet, a smaller radar, and a shorter range missile, and none of that mattered because they brought better pilots. He wasn't the hunter, he had never been the hunter, and he'd been the rabbit the whole time. Look at where those F-16s are positioned right now. That's the textbook firing position for shooting at a fighter that can only see forward. They don't need to lock the Chinese formation to threaten it from up there. They have geometry instead. Range is for the guy who has to be detected first. Geometry is for the guy who already won. From 36,000 feet at the J-16 formation's Deep 6, the AMRAAM solution isn't complicated. What's hanging on Outlaw 1's wing, the AIM-120D AMRAAM, America's beyond visual range workhorse, fire and forget so the pilot can turn away the second it leaves the rail. Drop the missile off the wing, let it accelerate to Mach 4 on the rocket motor, and the active radar seeker takes over inside 15 kilometers. Range past 160 kilometers. Tampa to Miami in 2 minutes. 20-kilogram blast fragmentation warhead, and the missile that ended the era of the dogfight. Total time of flight from launch to impact, under 60 seconds. The J-16 lead would have less than 30 seconds to detect a launch warning he wasn't expecting from a direction his radar wasn't looking. The geometry is doing the work the missile was supposed to do, and the J-16 lead has no idea any of it is happening. Every Chinese pilot in the formation knows that exact geometry on sight. They all just felt the recognition land at the same instant, and now nobody on the formation freak could find a single word worth saying. If you enjoyed this video, then watch this other video where a Chinese helicopter tried to take a US helicopter head-on. Bye for now.